This company is born and built on being install experts. And that's what we do, and that's what we focus on, and we're really good at it. So we're coming in with what we believe to be the leanest, most appropriate pricing, durations, and everything that makes the most sense for the client. We're on an exponential curve of pipeline of things that are going to be coming and delivered to the market. And we have to sustain high quality standards and delivery practices. The biggest thing that we can do for our community is, as people are adopting and joining in this sort of second wave of comers into mass timber, is to take
This is the Mass Timber Group Show. I'm Brady, and today I caught up with Time, the VP of Operations for Kinsol, a mass timber installation company that's been around since the very beginning. Kinsol is one of the most experienced mass timber installers around, and they're tackling some of the most impressive, high-profile projects here in North America. With big expansion into the States from Canada, they're bringing game-changing opportunities to local workforces that will move the entire mass timber sector forward. Time walked us through the must-haves for mass timber installers, what to look for in these companies, and where he sees the biggest opportunities for mass timber in the next decade. But before we jump in, if you want the skills, knowledge, and tools to confidently work with mass timber and win more projects, you need to check out the Mass Timber Group Summit this August in Denver. With over 30 workshops hosted by mass timber experts, 3 amazing networking parties, 6 mastermind sessions, and building tours of the coolest projects in Denver, I guarantee you'll walk away with the information and connections to level up your career with mass timber. Check out the link in the show notes below for more info. And if you like these podcasts, subscribing to the channel is the biggest compliment you can give us. It helps us book incredible guests like Time and brings more mass timber awareness to the rest of the world. So with that, let's get into it.
So Kinsol is a North American insulation erection mass timber company. We self-perform install work of mass timber elements. Kinsol is capable of design assist and any level of collaboration with procurement and the install and erection drawings, and everything logistics that's required to put together a mass timber building.
Got it. And so you guys have been around since kind of the inception of mass timber in North America, but you guys are expanding now. Like, where's your guys' focus moving forward?
Yeah, our headquarters, our mothership was out of BC, Canada, near Victoria and Mill Bay. And we've expanded into the United States. In 2019 was the inception of Kinsol Timber Systems, Inc., which is our U.S. entity. And from that time, we've executed work in California, Washington. Now we're on the East Coast or heading toward the East Coast in Michigan, with projects coming up in Massachusetts this summer as well.
And if people don't know, you have some of the most high-level clients in the world. And I know that we're not supposed to get really into into the weeds. It's a little super secret squirrel stuff going on still, but at least can we talk a little bit about your Google projects that you have going on, maybe the teams that are a part of that, and as much as you can talk about it.
Sure. I mean, initially what brought Kinsol to the US were projects with Google. We had MT1 is what kicked them all off. And then we had a few more buildings when we did Java as well. And those were with the Excel and Elevated companies there in the Bay Area. And then currently we're getting ready to kick off our YouTube project. That's the SBO1, phase 1 of the YouTube headquarters in San Bruno. There are 2 4-story buildings, approximately combined 440,000 square feet of mass timber columns, beams, panels. Really exciting project, and we're getting ready to receive material in April. So that's an exciting one to kick off there as well.
Why do you think so many of these big players, maybe not specifically Google, but there's like a lot of focus on these big high profile companies like moving into mass timber? What are you seeing as kind of like the common thread for that?
Oh, well, I think what we're seeing is everybody's dedication to sustainability, right? So with the COP Accords and everybody making 2040, 45, 2050 declarations of levels of net zero commitment, fundamentally, mass timber is one of the driving structures towards carbon capture. So, coming from a concrete background, um, the it's been incredibly interesting to be in the timber world, and now I'm starting to learn more about the sustainability aspects and the influence that it has on uh, the mainstream market. So you're seeing customers, clients like Walmart, Google, Nike, Under Armour, Lego. I mean, across the board, we're seeing really high profile clients that are looking to develop and grow their sustainable contribution to construction. And quite often, these large clients have their own real estate development arms of their businesses. So they're as much in the developer market as anybody else, as any other high profile developers, is what we're seeing, with these profile clients.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you talked about having kind of like these companies have a development arm inside of, what people think of like Google, YouTube, Microsoft, what have you.
Sure.
But inside their development arm and for other developers out there, it, the sustainability factor is really, really important. Like we can't emphasize that enough.
Hmm.
But in the end, like it's got to make sense financially for these projects to get built. Are you seeing kind of like different trends in the industry from other developers, whether they're the Googles and the Microsofts of the world, like down to, these multifamily developers? Like, what are you seeing for I don't, practical is maybe not the right word, but kind of like
Sure.
the financial, tangible benefits of using mass timber?
Well, I think, so I came in 2017 to Mass Timber. I first started with Swinnerton Mass Timber at their very first project, which is now essentially Timber Lab. And, at the time that I came in, I would call that sort of the middle or tail end of the early adopters, right? The first projects that we're seeing fundamentally in the US is around 2012. And what we were seeing in Canada is around 2008 to 10. It's debatable exactly what you want to call a mass timber building, how much glulam really is makes it a mass timber structure. But from that time, I think the folks that were the early adopters, there's been a conversation about normalization, right? So many of the early projects have been very creative, but very specialized and unique in their inception, unique in their design, unique in their connection, detailing, and processes. So as we are building toward an understanding of normalization as mass timber as a structure, then we can start to see some of the differences around it being a financially, how do I want to say this? Being a financially predictable and, to be able to execute the pro forma that you require in order to get the loans, to get the insurance, to get all the things that are going to allow a developer to predictably get into the market with the mass timber design. And so what we've seen in the past is that you have traditional construction that maybe developers are thinking, gosh, I'd really like to make this in wood, but they've already done the design for concrete and already done the design for steel. So the challenge is that they were coming to those of us who have been around for quite some time and saying, hey, how much would it cost to make this in wood? The difficulty is it wasn't designed for wood, right? It's got a different span layout. Then it's got different foundations and different weight of the building, different diaphragm requirements, and all these different elements that make a structure sound and efficient and affordable. On top of it, there wasn't a lot of research early on. We're seeing more public and private research going into fire ratings, seismic ratings, all of the elements that go into these buildings that can make them predictable and efficient and cost affordable. What we saw early on was the efficiency in install, right? So install is definitely going to give you a leg up. What we're seeing in the last 4 or 5 years seismically within the codes is the cost of concrete and steel going up. And there's both structural reasons for that. And then there's also, political reasons can have influence on, steel embargoes, things like that. So what we're seeing both amongst the public and private partnerships, you see it with universities, within the companies that are very invested in the mass timber development, is research and design that's being shared amongst the community so that we can grow market share, right? So even though a lot of these companies might even be competitors, we're all competing for market share over traditional building and concrete and steel. So as we're trying to get what we really need is a normalization with more third-party suppliers, right? We need companies, we're seeing, for example, like Simpson and Hilti are starting to bring more components to market that could be off the shelf spec, for example. We're starting to see more of those components amongst, MTC and Rotoblast, and so that not every building has to be a one-off, unique, special. I always joke and say a custom deck. It's got to be something that there is a spectrum for repeatable, affordable housing that is pre-designed. And for some of the market that we're seeing with, buildings like Ascent or T3 or any of these projects where they were like, okay, now we want to replicate them. When we reach a point where we're maximizing the efficiency, we're seeing the cost go up amongst traditional building. But most importantly, and I think we saw this at the Mass Timber Conference, this is completely anecdotal, but what I saw is historically, when they would come to the installer or come to the contractor and say, hey, how do we make this concrete and steel building into wood? And we would have to work backwards and tell them all the reasons why this isn't super practical. Now what we're seeing is there was a lot of developers at the conference this year. And I think notably that the conference was driving toward bringing in more developers that are now saying, hey, we want to design in wood, in mass timber. So in seeing that rise of the market, there's more experience amongst the architects, more experience amongst the engineers, and a greater willingness for contractors that might have been on the fence to say, hey, we want to wait before we get into this second wave, if you will. And I think that's what we're seeing is the second wave of the economy of mass timber is going to be a little more normalized. They're still paying premiums on it, but as we continue to get a fundamental understanding of how to build the buildings and to make them efficient, that we'll continue to see that the premium is not as high as we think. We can produce and install these buildings a lot faster with less challenges around RFIs because we've built them in a digital twin before we got there. The logistics are super efficient. And you're getting, a better return on investment, faster leasing. There's a lot of opportunities on the back end of the financing that is being differentiated amongst traditional erected buildings.
Hey, we're going to get back to the podcast in just a second. But first, I have a question for you. Are you somebody looking to build a mass timber project? If the answer is yes, then you need to put together an experienced team.
Our partners at Cornerstone Timber Frames are leaders in heavy timber construction and have 30 plus years of experience, which means you can trust them to get the job done right.
They collaborate with Nordic Structures to bring you the highest quality FSC certified mass timber available. They also have some of the most advanced fabrication technology in the industry, so your project goes up smoothly without costly on-site modification or delays.
That means they have the experience, network, and technology to make your next mass timber project a success. Learn more about Cornerstone Timber Frames by clicking the link in the show notes below. Yeah, the faster leasing was one thing that I heard really stood out to me at the International Mass Timber Conference out in Portland. If people don't know, that's the global stage for mass timber. It's in the Portland Convention Center. There's I think 3,500 people showed up this year. It's incredible. I mean, I think there's 150 exhibitors. And one of the things that Hines, one of the largest developers in the world, you go to their website, hines.com, you'll see they have $93 billion in development. So mega corporations. And they're pushing all of their chips out onto the table. And there was a keynote that I think it was under the ULI keynote. And they talked about how Hines with their T3 projects, and they have one in downtown Denver that actually I'm going to go tour here in a couple of weeks because it's just completed. They actually sold out their tenant to Xcel Energy, one tenant before it ever hit the market. And that's a real world, large scale tenant out here that I saw firsthand. But they said that also that they were getting 18% above the comps of the premiums for that region or for that,
right?
The 18% above where the market premiums are. And they just basically the thread and the moral to the story was like, hey, if it's not in timber, it's old news. It doesn't
Mm,
even make sense. And they kind of described about how one of their projects was like, been in the works for so long that it's like 8 to 10 years old, and it's finally getting done. And it's like, it's almost just dated and outdated. That was like a really long-winded comment about how like all these incredible stories were taking place at the International Mass Timber Conference.
sure.
Also, the booths were much, much bigger, which is super cool. What else stood out to you? Was there any conversations that you kind of saw? Because I also agree. I saw there was more developers and people doing just bigger stuff, more stuff. And anyways, anything else stand out to you?
Well, there's been a lot of fluctuation with supply and a lot of conversation about getting capacity to market, and so we're definitely seeing more players in that realm. But amongst the developer realm and greater adoption, there certainly is. There's a lot of curiosity and potential old thinking around how these projects are come to market. So, right, there's only so many suppliers, tangible suppliers that are going to deliver throughout the North America, right? You've got a handful of European supply, you got West Coast, East Coast, and Canada, and fairly regional stuff in the US. We work with all of these suppliers. We both pursue work, we actively put work in place. There's a great level of experience there. And what I saw, kind of the thread of discussion is there was a lot of desire for turnkey solutions. And I understand the logic behind it. The sort of running comment that I heard from contractors was one neck to choke. And although that is a seemingly practical approach to how we could deliver a project, there's a lot of different ways to approach that could, again, go back to Brady, to your comment of how do we reduce cost. And the assumption is that if a contractor hires a supplier, hires a design team, an installer, perhaps a delegated design or design assistant in engineering, is that all of these different components are going to be in conflict. But historically, when there's such a small amount of people or companies that are bringing projects, really eloquent, beautiful legacy projects of all sizes, from the TIs all the way up to the newest, biggest version of whatever we're building, is that we can execute based on our relationships and come through a design assist, come through the entire logistics plan, erection plan, and execute and deliver these projects without having a turnkey or supply package all under one house. And what that does is that's going to save the client money, right? Because the supplier is not carrying the installer and marking up our package, right? So we're coming in with what we believe to be the leanest, most appropriate pricing, durations, and everything that makes the most sense for the client, not for the supply, not for, whatever other players are involved in that package. Now, we can do it both ways, and there are reasons on both sides. So there's a lot of flexibility there. It doesn't mean that we discount one or the other, but it was certainly an interesting conversation from developer to contractor of like, okay, well, how do we actually deliver this? And so for Kinsol, we are, our bread and butter, this company is born and built on being install experts. And that's what we do. And that's what we focus on. And we're really good at it. And we're seeing that within our growth and the execution of our projects that we have going on, both on the US and the Canadian side, because we continue to grow on the Canadian side as well. So from the conference, there really is more of a through line of just deeper discussions and understanding about who the key players are. Because in the last few years, it was more of people walking up and be like, who are you? And what do you do? And can you explain that again? Whereas now we're seeing from the development and the contractor side of folks saying, no, we know how this all kind of goes, but now we're getting more nuanced. And we're getting a much more sophisticated understanding of how this industry works and who the key components are. And there's certainly new folks coming in all the time that need to be discovered and explored. But amongst us that have been here for a little bit and spent some time, tossing and turning and thinking about projects and pursuits all night long. That's the element that if we can project that through the mass timber community to where that expands outward to new developers and developers that are excited in markets to bring these things together. It's that was the most key element to the Mass Timber Conference for me. Now, admittedly, I don't always get to see a lot of the talks. And, I spend a lot of time jabbering at the booths and making sure that people are getting all the information they need. So, there's probably a point in time where we bring enough people in where maybe I spend a little more time investigating the speakers and everything they have to share. But that's my interface level of what I'm understanding and taking away from the conference. It's amazing to see the growth and the maturity starting to happen around the community. And as always, and probably does not need to be stated, what an amazing community. If there's anything I take away every year is how blessed I am to be a part of it, to have stumbled upon it. With 20 plus years of concrete, I never expected. Listen, when I was doing concrete, nobody from Singapore or Australia or Canada, nobody ever called and said, "Hey, how's the aggregate in your concrete?" No. But I get calls from all over the world from people that saying, "Hey, tell us about that project. Tell us about the timber that went into it. Tell us about how it was delivered overseas. Like, how did you pull stuff out of the containers?" It is fascinating. And the one thing for me coming up through the field as from apprentice superintendent into operations is that I'm always amazed at how entertained architects and design teams are to talking to superintendents and field guys that actually install the work. Because there's a big disconnect there. So whenever I get a chance and to be able to meet with architects and design teams and developers, especially at the conference, you can hold court. They love hearing the war stories. They love hearing the successes, the triumph of the teams, how you came up with solution and delivered projects. That is a fundamental part of what we do in the mass timber community is share, right? Because even though like my booth this year was right next to my direct competitor, however, we might be competitors, but we're competing for market share. I need all of the Carpentry Pluses and the Timber Labs and the Colorado Framers and Seagate. I need this community of builders and developers and design. I need them to be successful, to deliver their projects successfully, safely, highest quality, because that's how we continue to grow the market, normalize it. And coming back to your question is how do we accommodate the premium cost of timber? Is all of these things have to be in line. And the more we do it, the more predictable it will become. And coming out of the conference, it continues to sow the seeds of standards. The biggest thing that we can do for our community is as people are adopting and joining in this sort of second wave of comers into mass timber is to take any of their expectations and align them with standards that are proven and true over the years. And we should hold that standard because otherwise we're going to thin the success of future projects. We're on an exponential curve of pipeline of things that are going to be coming and delivered to the market. And we have to sustain high quality standards and delivery practices in order to keep from causing harm to what has been so far a legacy growth in an emerging market.
And one of the things that stood out to me at the conference, like I wholeheartedly agree with you about the collaboration in the mass timber industry. Like Nick and I have experienced that first. But specifically on kind of like what's the tide that raises all boats. And through the conversations that we've had, not necessarily on the podcast, but offline, talking to people who are kind of kicking the tires for mass timber. One of the big things that kind of seems to be a reemerging trend or theme rather is a lack of like experienced installers in their area. And I see a lot of GCs like doing self-perform because of that issue. But I noticed at the conference, there was many new installers that were kind of spun off of really, really large construction companies. Are you seeing a trend of like people moving into the install space because there's such a demand for the skills and services that people like Kinsol provide?
cities and states you'd never expect are completely bullish on mass timber. You take a state like Michigan, who you would never think, would be really producing this type of work and or media presence and forefront of code adoption and all these things. We're seeing, like when you see Ascent in Milwaukee, we're seeing places that are turning into these beacons of mass timber. And because of it, there's lots and lots of different markets that installers can throw their hat in the ring. You're seeing it both in general contractors who have self-perform arms and entities. The biggest challenge to entry to market is consistency, right? So if you want to be a mass timber installer, and there's a couple ways that you're going to have to approach that. Because if you're a general contractor and you want your self-perform arm to start implementing and installing mass timber, you might only, like most of those companies, only want to do the install for their own GC. Now, the problem is mass timber, by its very nature, is a short delivery to market as far as the actual installation, right? So some of these projects are 5 weeks. If you do a 6-month-long mass timber job, that's a long project. And because of that, in order to keep skilled, trained employees consistently working in mass timber, you need a lot of jobs. That is very difficult for general contractors to do if you're only going to pursue work that your general contractor has won, right? You're just not going to get as many looks at it as, a company like ourselves that we will chase mass timber. And one of the reasons why we do chase it nationwide is we pursue work in major markets across the country, and our model is built around traveling because that's what it takes to get the jobs. You do not have very proficient installers in every market that's building. You've got projects all over this country, and they're not just in major cities. So the ones in major cities, you're going to see a lot more competitors and see folks locally that have a shot at jumping into it. And then the further away you get from the metropolitan areas, the harder it is to find installers and qualified installers at that. That's the biggest challenge right now, I think. And what we heard from the conference is we need installers. They're coming. There's a lot of framing companies that have gone through the multifamily element that are trying to figure out how to implement. Those local installers that have other business models, they're going to continue to flourish. They'll figure it out. It's mass timber is it is a user-friendly approach, right? As erectors, because it's everybody talks about the kit of parts and assembly. The heavy lifting is in the planning, and then executing safely. And that takes a lot of experience around hoisting and things like that. So we're going to see the GCs continue to go after it, but it's going to be hard to have a consistent pipeline. And then we're going to see a lot of local installers go after it, but they're going to need successful other business models to supplement that work. Otherwise, they're going to have to be like our company and travel to get it.
So when somebody's looking for an installer on their project, like what are the meat and potatoes that they need to make sure that this XYZ company has? Like they need to be proficient in this. They need to have the teams to do Y. Like what makes a good mass timber installation company?
Experience helps. Right.
Sure.
I do. And listen, we're talking about a market that's 12 years old.
Yeah. It's new.
There's a handful of superintendents in this country that have built the majority of the projects. It's a fascinating concept to think about, the difference between 20 years of concrete and that I had and now just the 14 years of timber. So you're definitely going to need experience. You're going to need folks that have great relationships with their supply chain. That is fundamentally probably the biggest successful element is when contractors, what it looks like for me to pursue a job is I get a call from a contractor and they say, hey, we need a price from you. It's Thursday night. They want one Friday morning. My very first question is do you have a supplier?
So do they task you with the procurement then?
No, we don't carry the procurement. We're a small install company. When you look at the ratio of costs for the fiber, for the mass timber compared to what our install numbers are going to look like, it's very out of proportion. and it would be a substantial, cash flow thing for us to carry that. But what we do need is we need pieces and parts. We need assumptions based on supply, and different suppliers are going to carry um, different material types, right? So you're going to have 4-foot wide panels, you're going to have 8-foot wide panels, you're going to have 60-foot panels or 40-foot panels. And different suppliers might have some input over what they can bring to the market. We need to price accordingly. So, getting back to your question, we know each one of these supply companies incredibly well. And so for our relationship with them, when we're, daily, weekly on the phone calls with their project managers and estimators, is that we have a familiarity of their process and they do ours. So when a contractor comes to us, it's like, hey, no problem. As long as you have considered some suppliers, we can go have this conversation with them now, get the details that we need. And we share that relationship in order to get through the pursuit. That is a huge beginning. Secondly, what we really look at is design assist capabilities. Now, we're not engineers, so we're not going to come to your design assist and design a knife plate for you or anything like that. But what we are going to do is start very early in constructability, because there's quite a bit within the design review that may be the engineers or architects, but fundamentally with the engineers, there may be options. And those options could have impacts and ramifications on the duration or complexity of the erection. So when Kinsol is there through the design assist on a project, we start very early on with design assist and constructability, with logistics plans, bracing plans, and how we're going to deliver that, the truckloads and how they're going to come in, the crane plans. Those all have to be started very early in the conversation. And that's really the crux of what makes Kinsol great at what we do, is our combined effort and understanding of just years and years of erection plans and how to develop the logistics so that it doesn't impact on design or project delivery. Right. And so when we have those discussions early on, it increases the safety of the project and increases the efficiency, and it brings cohesion to the entire team to understand what our schedule looks like and our approach to building will have an impact on design and delivery.
Got it. So where are you guys focused on most of the growth now? Do you see different trends in different regions? Do you see like market opportunity that Kinsol specifically is going after?
We look, a lot of it is growing our familiarity. So there's a tremendous amount of folks that didn't understand up until recently that Kinsol is building in the United States, especially with having projects that are fairly exclusive and kept quiet. We can't put a lot of media around them, right? So it's been a challenge in the first few years of rolling out, 4 different buildings and not to really be able to discuss them too much. So for us, the growth in the United States and into Eastern Canada is it's got a wide range. We've started out heavy in California and Northern California, and we've done some projects throughout California and into Washington, Seattle area. Now we're in Michigan. Currently, we're building 2 projects at Adelaide Point in Muskegon, Michigan, near Grand Rapids there. And then we've got our project, another project this summer. We'll be heading out to Amherst College in Massachusetts. I'm seeing a lot of growth in mid-Atlantic, around the Great Lakes area has been phenomenal as far as getting different opportunities and pursuits. Just a tremendous amount of amazing work being done in that region. We're seeing just great architecture coming out of there. I've had the chance to work with Corbin Associates a couple of times. We're seeing great public assistance coming through with people like Sandra Lupien in the Michigan area and the Leesmas and creating that amazing project at Adelaide Point. Then going on, to seeing what's happening at institutionally at the universities in Massachusetts. I mean, they're just really getting after beautiful projects on the East Coast. A lot of work down in DC and Virginia that we're bidding, things showing up in Tennessee, North Carolina, and the Southeast. So it's been exciting to be able to get a look and be able to participate on both coasts. And now we're just trying to hit everything in the middle. Because I can tell you, growing up in this industry, I grew up in Northern California doing concrete there. And the Bay Area is a fairly good sized place, but you're just kind of going city to city around the Bay and you don't see much. What we're doing now is at such a different level of that I ever anticipated. For us to be able to travel into cities and have an impact on local communities and bring a sustainable product to a growing industry, an emerging market, to a town, to a city where there's so much pride around it. There's so much enthusiasm, so much participation. It is one of the most exciting things I've ever been a part of, both professionally and personally. It's a legacy that goes so much further beyond building concrete high rises and public works projects. It's much more intimate, and that delivery to the community is really, we want to take that as many places as we can. We are a Kinsol Timber in the United States is the first #1 agreement signatory carpenter union erection company. Kind of a mouthful, and I probably said it awkwardly, but point being is that we're signatory in every state. So we can pursue both union and non-union work, but we use union carpenter employees to deliver our projects, if the project's open shop or not. There was one thing that was brought up in the keynote that that must have been the keynote on Wednesday, when there was discussing labor and shortages in the United States and seeing some of the flexibility around the unions. I can tell you, having the international carpenters as a partner for labor and supply, I was sitting in that keynote and I wish I had the mic. I wish I could raise my hand and say, hey, listen, I don't have labor problems. Yes, there's no silver bullet, and it can be difficult to find leadership. There are challenges for us in labor, but fundamentally we have access to highly competent, qualified, capable craft in every major and smaller market around the country. So we come to market with our leadership, with a handful of foremen, carpenters, apprentices, and then we can get supply locally there in town. Right now, we have 16 union carpenters that we were brought out of the local hiring hall. With our partnerships with the union there, we get together with them months and months in advance and let them know what's going on. And they have training centers and rigging certification, all these different elements that they can bring to their constituency, and we bring them training. So one of the things that we're fundamentally doing as we're moving through the market, city by city, state by state, is that we're helping to train the future of mass timber carpenters. So that on some of these union jobs where previously you'd go to the hiring hall and say, hey, I need a mass timber carpenter, they didn't exist. Well, now we're reaching that point between partnerships with woodworks and different contractors and companies like Kinsol, is that we're able to walk in and say, hey, we're going to help train some of your folks. We're going to partner up with you, and we're going to grow the community of installers to bring it to the highest level that's possible. And so for us, that gives us an opportunity to walk into just about anywhere we want to go and deliver a project and infuse the community. Yep. Right? We're not just walking in, building something, dropping a mic and walking out. Is that we're actually seeing the engagement, and that engagement brings continued opportunity. Because the most important thing that we do is we try to leave we try to leave something of legacy in our wake. It's not just a beautiful building. It's an outpouring of years and culmination of work and consideration of what this means, not only to us as a builder, but to the folks that use these buildings every day. And that's the part that excites me more than I think anything.
It's back to that whole rising tide lifts all boats,
Absolutely.
right? You can come in and you can upskill the local labor force, so that then the next project that comes in, even if you're not involved with it, right? Those people already have the training. They can already just plug right into whatever's going on. And that'll help, everybody become more friendly towards mass timber, experience with it. And then as that happens, projects become easier. There's less friction. And then the whole mass timber industry as a whole takes a step forward. Right. So that's really great work. And I'm glad you guys are doing that.
If we all share, there's enough. There's
Exactly.
enough. I mean, the growth cycle here for this emerging market, there might reach a point where people are trying to get cutthroat. I hope not. I've never seen anything like this as far as a community rollout for a building system. And you're 100% right. There are folks that came to our project in Michigan. I was out there a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to one of the riggers that was down at the truck, and he goes, "Hey man, your time, right?" Yeah, yeah. He goes, "I heard about you," and because he's been working with our superintendent and project team. I said, "Man, I've heard about you too, brother." And he goes, "Dude, I want you to know that I live, about an hour and 45 minutes away, and I normally get a higher scale and Detroit projects, but I heard about this project, and so I came here. And you need to know that there's another 3 guys here or so that are all commuting over an hour and a half, where they had work else places. They're qualified, capable, and awesome people, but they decided to come to this project."
Yeah.
And, I hope that Kinsol can continue to build that reputation and that excitement and enthusiasm. And I absolutely, those guys live in Michigan. Some of them might start traveling with us because we've built such an amazing relationship with them. But the ones that stay, they're going to continue to build Michigan, and they're going to build it to great heights, and they're going to do it with their hard work and their learning curve and what they've grown and all of the effort they put in to adopt this new structural system and their knowledge around it. And they're going to share that with our competitors. And I'm happy for it. I'm happy for their success. I'm happy to have contributed to benefit the community. That's really what our adoption in with working with the Carpenters Union is, just that is that how we lift everyone up. So you're 100% right. I agree with you.
Yeah, that's fantastic work. I'm glad you guys are doing it. And so you shared kind of like a lot of inspiring stories, the collaboration, the upskilling of the workforce, everything to kind of push the mass timber industry forward. But if we could turn the lens a little bit and just talk about time for a second, like where do you go to learn about mass timber? Where are you going to stay at the forefront of your trade? Where are you taking these lessons learned and then passing them on to others?
That's an interesting question. There's a wealth of information, right? So there's kind of a renaissance in discovery, LinkedIn, right? You go into LinkedIn, and I patch into every project, every every source that I can, webinars, conferences. There's just sort of the usual podcasts like this one. It is really, it's in the people. And where I go and what I do is that I spend as much possible time as I possibly can, both mentoring and being mentored. Right. So and it doesn't have to be just mass timber builders, right? The people that report directly to me are a wealth of experience. I mean, within the industry, there's quite a few people that I worked with at Swinnerton that have, we've all made our different ways through the industry, and there's quite a few folks that work for us that I have a tremendous amount of experience with, but I continue to learn from them. Right. The discovery in how we approach things, we've reached a level of there's always more to learn about mass timber, but really the growth comes from how effectively we work together to deliver it.
Yep.
Because that's where the knowledge comes from. The more receptive I am to meeting new people in the industry, I can't help by almost through osmosis, I can't help but to just continue to absorb this material. And the other thing is to hang on to storied relationships. There are folks that I've worked with, both on projects or at specific companies over the years that are just, the phenomenal amount of talent that's out there. And for me, I'll be 50 this May, right? So I've got nearly 30 years in the industry. I've got 29 years in the industry. And I've never seen a more educated and refined and capable workforce in the history of modern construction, right? There was no LEED certification. Let's go back. There were no cell phones. There was no iPads. There wasn't digital twins. What we've seen in the changes of the industry happen so rapidly that the one constant are the relationships that we have with people.
Yep.
And so as people are adopting more information, I feel incredibly blessed to be in a community that's so available to share. And so for me, the tightest thing to do is to really grasp the different folks and all their specializations. You talk to one person and they've got, a master's degree in mass timber education. You're like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And then you talk to another person that's, Mike Marshall is a great example. He's the president, CEO of Kinsol. His trajectory was through the mills, through the plants and manufacturing. And so that's a world that I didn't grow up with. I came up in the field. I was there to catch the stuff as it showed up on trucks. He was the one assembling it, gluing it, and trying to figure out how to build the first mass timber buildings by hand before they were CNCing things. Right. So I can turn to somebody like that as an example of it's a never ending wealth. I'll be in a podcast or a meeting or something, and somebody will ask a question and he will just deep dive into this knowledge of glue lambs and species and layups and all these elements that, wow, it makes you feel like an infant sometimes. So really diving deep into the community is my number one way of absorbing new material.
Yeah, no, I like that answer a lot. And
yeah,
being newcomers to the industry ourselves, we didn't even know what the difference between CLT and glue lamb 3 years ago. Right. And so
sure.
When we went to the Mass Timber Conference, we were just like little babies, like tucked under somebody's wing, just trying to like find our way. So through all these conversations, the people that you're working with, the exceptional team, the employees, the project partners, everything in between, hidden gem, the untapped potential, something that's flying under the radar in mass timber stands right now that people should be aware of moving forward, that's going to really kind of explode over the next couple of years.
So I think there's a few different ones. And one, I have to say, let me back up. I think the pinnacle is the training, is that getting more and more qualified people in the field that have an understanding of how to erect and how to behave around mass timber, how to be organized around it. So I think the labor force is going to be a magnificent impact on what the next 5 to 10 years look like as we're delivering a tremendous amount of, there's an exponential curve of the pipeline for what the amount of projects that are going to come to light in the next 5 to 10 years. By 2034, we're going to see a wealth of projects, and the workforce is going to look different than we could even imagine. I truly believe that. With those delivery of those projects, we're going to see more quote unquote off the shelf projects, pre-designed. So you're going to see affordable housing that, work that like, Element 5 has designed for affordable housing. That's, 2 to 4 or 5 stories that it's already pre-designed fundamentally, that any jurisdiction or municipality can get a hold of them and say, hey, we need a 4-story building this size in this area. And they're like, cool, we've got a couple designs for you ready to go. First weeks at Kinsol, we spoke with the developer, not to be named, and they were asking about, building 18 to 20 story high rises out of timber. Super exciting, right? Somewhere in the discussion, they asked like, hey, would your same team work on if we had more than one building? I'm like, well, gave my typical answer. It's like, likely we would want them to do that, but you never know how the industry goes. Depends on what you have. And like, well, our plan is to build 10, preferably 20 of these a year. Okay, sure. If you plan on replicating something 10 to 20, it changes my entire business model, Yep. But what was interesting to kind of back that up is that's the trend that I'm seeing. So anywhere from, like we talked about with the affordable housing, all the way up to 18 to 20 story buildings, we're in the age of replication. That's what prefabrication is all about.
Yep.
So I think that we're going to continue to see more blending of prefabrication elements. As we see hybrid buildings now from concrete and steel, we're going to see, I think we're going to see more blending of projects between in hybrids with timber and modular and panelized facades and things to continue the prefabrication element. And then lastly, one thing that it was funny years ago, I was working on a data center and at a major global corporation, construction company. And I was talking to their data center and industrial VP, and I was saying, pretty soon we're going to be doing these out of timber. And maybe it's not the whole thing. Maybe it's the front end office, right? You've got these Costco size warehouses of 370,000 square feet, and 85,000 square feet of that is front office. you're trying to build this power plant, basically. Why not put, for your LEED certification, you're doing all this wetland work, you're doing all these other things. Why not put a timber front end? It'd be super inviting, a warm element to essentially an industrial application. It would be fabulous. Well, no way, man. It's never going to happen. You're full of it. What about warehouses? What about distribution centers? Oh, no way. Never going to happen. Too expensive, impractical, and all that. Well, what are we seeing now? We're seeing the Microsofts and the Googles and all the different big data, the Intels, everybody's starting to build data centers with timber. They're still figuring it out. There's still a lot to do,
Exactly. I mean, that was the same conversation with multifamily and even single family applications 3 years ago. They're like, no way, not at all. And then a lot of the projects you just named are exactly that, right? They're like affordable housing off the table. Now there's companies that have entire, sets and designs specifically for those purposes. And I think you're absolutely right. You're seeing the data centers, the warehouses, the shipping depots, all of that. They're embracing it too. So it's just a sight.
We have in Canada, we were predominantly on the West Coast, near the island. And now we have our first project in Brampton, in Ontario, Toronto area for Prologis. It's a distribution center.
Yep.
So it'll be one of the first of its kind, and it's columns, beams with a panel roof, and it's big and it's tall and it's got its challenges, but Prologis is a worldwide, facilitator of distribution buildings and all of the elements that go with it. I mean, they're a massive company, but they also, we asked way early in the podcast, why? Is because they've declared their sustainability goals by 2040 or 45, that a certain percentage of all their buildings are going to be sustainable. Well, here's number one. So Kinsol is really excited to be a part of that. And it's one of the things that helped us broker and anchor into a new market, into a new region, right? Is that when the right jobs and the right community is there to build and develop and expand the market, it's great to be with a company like Kinsol that we get to be a part of these things. We've been a part of a lot of firsts, and we're not the only ones. There's a lot of great companies out there, but man, I got to tell you how exciting it is from Time's perspective, from my perspective, to be a part of that. It's important work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I enjoyed our conversation, Time. This was truly enlightening. Like you shed light on a lot of different topics that I think people are going to be really interested in and gain a lot of value from. So thanks for coming on the podcast and sharing your story and the good work that Kinsol is doing.
I absolutely appreciate it. I appreciate, the work that you guys are doing, coming to market and sharing all of this information. And again, it's the relationships, right? You guys are bringing everybody together that's getting a chance to talk and share their story. But the important part of it is to connect. So, anybody that's interested in talking shop, which I can do, this podcast could have been twice as long quite easily, just because it's interesting to me, because I feel like a novice still. I feel like there's so much more to learn. And so having the opportunity to do so is usually born out of a good conversation with great people. So anybody that's interested in reaching out, I'm happy to have that conversation with you. And you'll find that there's a lot more folks like myself at Kinsol that bring a wealth of knowledge from the industry, but are infinitely curious at what's next and want to be part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everybody listening, we're going to link all the ways you can contact Time and Kinsol down below. Please check them out, get in touch with them. And with that, we'll wrap it up.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely.